Good afternoon. My name is Brian Liddy, and this is the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland on Sunday, the 28th of May. I'm joined this afternoon by two guests. I have here coming in virtually, I have Rona Mackay. Good morning, Rona. Good afternoon, Rona, I'm
Morning.
sorry.
Just
And slipped up already. And Kenny Anderson. Hello, Kenny. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Afternoon.
So I'll just say a little bit about your backgrounds. Rona, you were a journalist for more than 20 years, and you're now the SNP MSP for Strathkelvin and Bearsden. So
yes.
thank you for taking time out today, especially such a nice day weather-wise. And Kenny, you're a businessman and an advocate for charities promoting the awareness of cancer and support for those affected by it. So again, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Very welcome.
Okay, so I'll move on to today's daily Ukraine update, day 459. Preliminary operations have begun to pave the way for a counter-offensive against Russian occupying forces. Mikhailo Podolyak, a Ukrainian presidential advisor, has said. And the commander of Ukraine's armed forces, General Valery Zaluzhny, raised expectations that a major operation could be imminent by declaring on social media that the time has come to take back what is ours. Explosions shook the Ukrainian capital in the early hours on Sunday, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said, adding that information was being clarified and defence systems were downing air targets. Klitschko said that at least one person had been killed and more injured in the night raids on Kyiv. Ukraine's defence ministry has claimed Russia is planning to simulate a major accident at the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station to try to thwart Kyiv's long-planned counter-offensive. Russian forces have temporarily eased their attacks on the besieged eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut to regroup and strengthen their capabilities, a senior Kyiv official said on Saturday. A construction worker has been killed near the Russian village of Plekovo, a few kilometres from the border with Ukraine, after shelling from the Ukrainian side, according to Roman Starovoit, the governor of Kursk region. Ukraine struck oil pipeline installations deep inside Russia on Saturday with a series of drone attacks, including on a station serving the vast Duzba oil pipeline that sends Western Siberian crude to Europe. Ukraine has asked Germany to supply it with Taurus cruise missiles, an air-launched weapon with a range of 500 kilometres or 310 miles, a spokesperson for the Defence Ministry in Berlin said on Saturday. President Biden has criticised Russia's plan to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Russia will start expelling German diplomats, teachers and employees of cultural institutions next month. Russia failed in a bid to prevent Ukraine taking a place on the World Health Organization's executive board at the World Health Assembly in Geneva. Russia has accused Japan of cynical, unscrupulous speculation over Tokyo's comments around the nuclear threat Moscow poses and promised to respond to Japan's latest round of sanctions imposed over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And our last update is Tehran has accused Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of anti-Iranian propaganda in his call for Iran to halt the supply of drones to Russia. So that's today's update. Rona, was there anything in there that caught your eye this afternoon?
Well, I think, to be honest, just the desperation of the situation. It's just awful to hear about these, these strikes happening, and I think it's a sign that Putin's, is desperate, and he's backed himself into a corner, and it's the civilians that are, as always in war, are paying the price. And I just think it's desperate, and I just wish we could see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you, Rona. And Kenny, is there anything that you saw that came out?
Just as Rona said, the tragedy of it all and the waste in human lives and the destruction of everything that people have built up over decades. it just emphasises the complete and utter folly of war.
Yeah, thank you. And human lives being lost on all sides, including civilians. So I'll move on to our first item. So today we're going to talk about the spat between Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby. No, it's okay, I'm joking. So I'll go on to, but it's actually Suella Braverman and the recent immigration figures. So we have a new record immigration figure which was published on Thursday, and it covers the period from March 2022 to March 2023. There are 600,000 net immigrants. That's less than predicted, but still a record high. The use of the word net means it's the difference between people who came into the UK and those who left the UK. So even after they took and did the arithmetics, there were more than 600,000 people came in than left the country. And just by the way, this is legal immigration only. This does not include what is now termed as irregular immigration. And if you hear anybody using that phrase, then it means illegal immigration. So that would be people in small boats. The Tory manifesto still aims to get figures down to the tens of thousands, and that has been the case since David Cameron was Prime Minister. So, Rona, do you think is the fact that the figures are less than predicted, has there been some kind of expectation management going on, where the mainstream media maybe knew that was going to be the case, and they've been saying it's going to be really high, like over 1 million, I think, with some of the figures. And now it turns out they can say, oh, it's a lot less, that's good.
I mean, I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. As far as I'm concerned, figures are figures. These are people we're talking about. And I, truly believe that immigrants enrich our nation. We want, students are coming to our world-class universities to study, and that's great. But we want them to be able to work here, to live here, if that's what they want. And I think it's becoming increasingly obvious that the UK government actually just don't want to let immigrants in, full stop. And they're trying all sorts of different, criteria and parameters to keep people out. I don't care about numbers. I just want people to be able to feel free to come to Scotland and enrich our nation. And that's, it's just the ludicrous situation that we are in when we have no power over our own immigration. And another reason why we should be independent, and at the very least, before that, gain the powers of immigration, because we're in a different we have a different mindset to this than the UK government, and that's very obvious. So numbers and statistics don't do anything for me. I just want people to be able to come and live and work here in Scotland.
Thank you, Rona. Kenny, word has it that there's widespread discontent with Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, in the Cabinet. Word has it that she tried to get out of voting on her own bill for small boats. Thursday's migration figures are higher than they were at the time that people voted for Brexit. So she is failing as a Home Secretary, and is failing in getting the numbers down to the tens of thousands. Do you think she's maybe trying to get sacked before the figures were published, or?
I don't know. I mean, she's a very strange individual with what she's been saying. I just find the energy and legislation and effort that's put into this futile effort to reduce immigration, when we had a very good system within the EU with freedom of movement. And it's almost as if the lack of freedom of movement has accelerated other types of immigration. And our NHS, our education systems, our fish processing, our fish catching, our care homes, farming, there are so many sectors that are badly affected by not having access to the workers that they need. And with the birth rate falling across the UK, we've got a population demographic that can be helped by immigration. The most successful economy in the world, up until recently at least, has been America, and it's founded on on immigration. I just think it's a futile waste of energy and effort, and we should be, as Rona says, opening up. We need people to come to Scotland and enrich our nation. And the only way we can actually appear to do that is by having independence and then re-engaging with European institutions. Initially, perhaps through EFTA, but ultimately by rejoining the EU.
Speaking of the EU, Kenny, when we were part of the European Union under freedom of movement, net migration to the UK was around 200,000 a year. And that's a lot less than it is now. And yet it seems that then we had no skill shortages, even though we had a lot less immigrants. Now we control our borders, but we have net migration at over 600,000 and we have skill shortages everywhere. How could that be?
I just don't know. I suspect that in trying to create a raft of regulation and laws to prevent it, none of these regulations and laws are effective, whereas the EU system for freedom of movement was a well-oiled, well-executed system. So I suspect that, for those who want to stop immigration into the UK, it's almost like the Dutch boy trying to hold his finger in the hole in the dam. I just don't understand wasting energy, time, legislative time on these things when really the government of the day, whether it's Scotland or the UK, it should be about looking after our industries, our people, and helping to enrich the country. If you look at similar small-sized nations in Europe to Scotland, Ireland, Denmark, Finland, Norway, they're all doing fantastically well. Ireland has got a fiscal surplus, which over the next 3 years could be as much as 65 billion euros. And they've got far fewer resources than Scotland has. It just enforces the idea that we've got to be positive, we've got to get our independence, and we've got to pull together to get that as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. And Rona, can you offer any light as to why we've got much higher immigration than when we were in the EU, and yet we still have skill shortages?
Well, I mean, I can only really echo what Kenny said. It's just one of the consequences of what we feared would happen, and it has happened. And the system isn't working, and we said it wouldn't, and it's definitely not working. So I mean, I think we just have to forge our own way as much as we can. And eventually, when we get independence, we can get things back on an even keel. But until then, just do what we can. And we're very aware of apprenticeships, training up young people for skill shortages, etc. And we'll do as much of that as we can and continue to do that after independence. But this is the effect of what we thought would happening.
Thank you, Rona. And just as a throwaway comment, it seems that when it comes to the media, the mainstream media, there seems to have been more anger against eco-protesters at the Chelsea Flower Show this week than there was against these record immigration figures, which seems telling. But today, I think I'm right in saying that Labour now want time-limited visas for scarce occupations, and all safe routes for refugees to seek asylum to have been closed. I don't know, Kenny, have we taken back control then?
No, and I think the problem with time-limited visas for scarce occupations will just discourage, for example, consultants for the NHS, doctors for the NHS nurses from bothering to come to the UK. I think if you were outside the UK and you were looking at it, you'd go, well, this is an unwelcoming place. So we're closing the door to the best people when we should be opening the door to the best people. I mean, the cancer charity I'm involved in has bought 2 robots for robotic surgery, for urology and for even lung cancer removal, lobectomies. And the purchase of those robots allows Aberdeen Royal Infirmary and Edinburgh Royal Infirmary to attract attract the very best of talent from across the world. But then we're doing that with one hand, and then Labour are going to time limit the visas. It's just crazy.
Sounds like a tough circle to square, if that's the right expression. Rona, just one last question before we move on. Kind of touching on what you said earlier on about how you don't really care about the actual figure, you just want it to be done properly. So for a country, a multicultural country such as we live in, that was practically built upon immigration, why is it such a problem, these figures and people, I don't know.
Well, I mean, as I say, I think it's, I don't understand the mindset of people who want to keep, people who want to come and contribute to our society and enrich it. I don't understand the mindset of them not wanting that. So, I don't know, why that is. And as I say, I think it's quite clear that we have a very different attitude towards immigration and, to having free movement of people. And it's quite clear. I mean, as for Labour's latest pronouncement, that they're now making it. They're not even trying to pretend there's much difference between them and the Tories with this. And each day goes by, you start to think, what is the difference between Labour and the Tories, or actually, what is the point of Labour? And it's quite sad, and I mean, I'm speaking as a nationalist, but to see the demise of the Labour Party and their values, I think is quite sad. They're going in a completely different direction from their founding fathers. I just think it's very sad to see it, but we're very clear on our stance on immigration.
Thank you, Rona. I'll move on to the next item. So, at a meeting of the Scottish Police Authority at Police Scotland headquarters at Tullyallen yesterday, the other day, Thursday I think it was, Chief Constable Sir Ian Livingston said that Police Scotland is institutionally racist and discriminatory in a public acknowledgement that has been welcomed by campaigners but prompted calls for action. Rona and Kenny, I've actually got a press release here from Amaranwar, which I'll read out a bit because I think it'll inform today's discussion. Amaranwar said, "It seems like a lifetime ago I made legal history in winning a civil action against Glasgow police for a racist attack in which they smashed my front teeth smashed out and told me this is what happens to black boys with big mouths." And then, of course, we're reminded when Police Scotland talk about institutional racism, then we're reminded of the families of Sheikh Surjit Singh Chokar and the likes. I don't really have a set question for this, but Rona, what do you think about this announcement?
Well, I mean, I completely welcome the announcement, and I think it's the first step to solving a problem is admitting that there is one. And I've been on the Criminal Justice Committee for since 2016, and we've interviewed witnesses in public and in private who have told us, of the experiences that they've had. So it is a problem, and I'm glad that Ian Livingston has now just been completely straight and open about this. You could say, well, why did he not do something while he was, before he was about to leave? Of course, that's a legitimate question. But I know that things have been changing within Police Scotland, probably not quickly enough. And I know that there has been, a realization that things have to change because, the last thing we want in Scotland is people not to be able to trust the police. And we really do have to, make every effort to stamp out discrimination in all its forms. And I think by this, coming out into the open and the police responding to it publicly now as well, I think it's a first step. And I think we've a long way to go, but I think it's a first step.
Thank you, Rona. And Kenny, I'm just intrigued about this notion about institutional racism. There's been a lot of noise in the media about whether it exists or not, and this idea about an institution being racist, doesn't that just mean that it's packed full of individual racists? And I've got a kind of a definition here which says that if you're part of an institution like Police Scotland, either as an employee or as a member of the public, you will be treated differently depending on the colour of your skin. So do you think institutional racism is a real thing?
I think it is, sadly. I do think it's a strange timing in making an outgoing statement. If it was an incoming statement from the yet to be announced new police chief constable, then I could understand he was addressing it, or if he did a joint press conference with Ian Livingstone. But there has to be questions as to how he can say that when he's outgoing, and has he done enough to change the institutions? I listened to Amra Unwin on a phone-in programme earlier in the week, just after the announcement. It must have been on Thursday or Friday morning, and Amra was excellent. The Police Federation representatives were highly defensive, but Ian Livingstone referred to the actual institutions within the police, processes, etc., all having underlying racist, misogynistic, anti-female bias. And of course, the BBC, the way they are, will interview one from each side representing each side of the story. But I think Amra Anwan was pointing out that from his point of view, he's representing actual police officers who have suffered misogynistic and racist discrimination within the police force. And then, of course, when they're dealing with the public, they can only police by consent in Scotland. So, they're undermining their position if they're going with institutional racism. So it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed fairly urgently, while still continuing to deliver policing across Scotland. Tough one, very tough.
Thank you, Kenny. Rona, just on a similar point, Ian Livingstone, the outgoing constable of Police Scotland, acknowledged in his statement that he was at pains to assert that he wasn't saying that individual officers were racist, sexist, misogynistic or discriminatory in any sense. He didn't mention homophobia or sectarianism, but going back to Amar Anwar's press release, there was a similar statement which said, "Today is testament to all those officers who took an oath to serve our community, but because of their race, sexuality or gender, they were persecuted and discriminated against by the police service." I suppose what I'm really wondering is, well, whether you agree with that, but also I'm intrigued with you being an MSP in Holyrood, what the feeling was around this statement, and what have you heard from colleagues? How do they feel about this?
Well, I mean, speaking personally, it's a kind of sense of relief actually for me that this statement has come out, because as I say, over the past 7 years or so, I and my colleagues have heard stories from women police officers who were discriminated against, and other instances of that. And I think I think that the feeling was that this is a welcome statement. It may be a bit, maybe late. You wonder why it's come at this stage, but I'm just relieved that it's now been said, and that this will be the positive way forward, and to take steps to address it, because it's absolutely, it's not an option not to do anything about it. And I know that there was an interview this morning in the Sunday Show with an assistant chief constable who's in charge of equality. And he was actually, I found him very reassuring. He acknowledged the problems, not trying to defend anything at all, but saying that they'll do absolutely everything they can and are doing with various initiatives to try and stamp this out. And I think it's been a culture, a long-standing culture in the police, which now has just hit the buffers. It cannot go on any longer, and I think you've got to start somewhere. And I think this is a huge turning point for the police, and I'm personally very relieved, and I think my colleagues and the First Minister was too.
Thank you, Rona. And just before we leave this topic, I just want to say that, again, going back to Amar Anwar's press release, he says that the Sheikh Obayo family want to place on the record their thanks to the Chief Constable for his compassion and empathy, wishing him all the best in his future. So it does seem that the statement has been well received in some quarters. But we'll move on to the next item, which is to do with renewable energy. So there's been a study by Stanford University which says that 145 of the world's nations could switch to 100% renewable energy in a few years using renewable energy technologies that are already available today. They recommend that the world should make the switch over by 2035, but certainly no later than 2050. One goal that they cite is to have maybe 80% of countries operating on renewable energy by 2030. The researchers looked at onshore and offshore wind energy, solar power, solar heat, geothermal electricity and heat hydroelectricity, and small amounts of tidal and wave electricity. And just before we move on, I'd just like to insert my usual busting of the solar myth that you can't have solar energy here in Scotland because we don't have enough sunshine. That's not true. You don't need sunshine, all you need is daylight, and we certainly have daylight in Scotland. And so, yes, we can have solar here as well as tidal and wind. So the study goes on to say that we do not need miracle technologies to solve these problems. And the researchers also say that switching to renewable energy would avoid utility grid blackouts and save consumers trillions of dollars, or pounds or euros, depending on which economy you're in. And in switching to clean renewable energy systems, they state that the world's energy usage would go down by 56% immediately. So, Rona, I wonder, are you aware of this report, and have you got any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I do have thoughts. I mean, Scotland does punch above its weight when it comes to renewables. I think everybody knows that. But we are again in this ridiculous situation where energy's reserved to the UK government, so it can hold us back to an extent. I mean, I can speak from a sort of personal perspective. I moved house last year. And I can say that the house it's a brand new house, a new build, and I can say it's so well insulated. It has solar panels on the roof, that our energy bills have halved at least since then. When the difference that we see coming from an older house, without the proper insulation, and it was by no means the worst, it's incredible. So it's an undisputed fact that insulation and the use of renewable energy will, completely slash energy bills. And in the middle of a cost of living crisis, that's something that everybody needs. And so, yeah, I think we have to we will forge ahead with with doing what we can. The UK government do have to invest much more in renewables. Because it's a ticking time bomb, really, because we cannot continue with this ludicrous situation of huge energy costs, and damaging the planet. So yeah, absolutely. But as I say, we're doing very well with our renewables, and if we had full control, we would be doing even better.
Thank you, Rona. And Kenny, so are you like Rona? Are your energy bills being halved, or are you like the rest of us, where because of the UK government's cost of living crisis, are your energy bills still going up?
Our energy bills are going up. I live in rural Aberdeenshire, so despite the fact the main gas pipeline passes within a mile of my house going south, there's no mains gas in our area. So we're dependent on heating oil. From the electrical point of view, we've changed all our light bulbs, so we've reduced our electrical consumption. It's an old granite steading building that we refurbished about 25 years ago, so we've got high insulation standards, but we're looking at solar panels, battery backup, and I've got a couple of quotes in at the moment that I'm looking at to do that. But I mean, Scotland's a net exporter of renewable energy most days of the year, and net overall during the year. And living in the northeast of Scotland, we can see a transition to renewable energy. The infrastructure needs to be upgraded. We need to. At the moment, Scotland is penalised whenever anybody puts electricity into the grid from Scotland. They've got to pay to do that. and it's higher in Scotland than other parts of the UK because of some archaic system that believed that the energy had to be generated near the centres of population. But with a decent distribution network, that's no longer necessary. And of course, we've got all the potential for offshore wind power in particular. But my very good friend Dick Winchester, who serves on the Scottish Government energy policy, is a great believer in using wind power to convert to clean hydrogen, which can power buses, lorries, ships, and even cars. I'm not sure the transition to battery-operated vehicles is as clean as is being suggested. The other thing we're seeing in this part of the world is we're seeing high-quality arable land that has been fought to be made arable over the centuries by our ancestors, being planted out in thick conifers by large companies who are simply greenwashing. So when you buy an airline ticket and it says offset your flight by planting 10 trees for £5, some of those trees are being planted in good arable land in Scotland. And it's changing the landscape in large parts of Aberdeenshire to the detriment. So there's an awful lot of double speak and double talk and greenwashing, and we've got to cut through that. And again, if we're independent, we can deal with that far more effectively than with a slow-moving Westminster government.
Interesting point, Kenny. Thank you. Kenny, you mentioned battery backups, and the report talks about storage. That's going to be something we're going to have to think about in the future. But I was reminded, Rona, of your colleague in Westminster, Philippa Whitford, MP. She made a point last week about energy storage, and she talked about a system called pump hydro storage systems. Which is when there's a surplus of energy, because we hear people complaining that sometimes wind turbines in Scotland have to get turned off, which then costs money rather than makes money, and which in itself I think shows just how rich Scotland is in terms of renewables if we have to turn the turbines off because there's too much energy being generated. But Philippa Whitford was saying that you take that energy, you don't turn the turbine off, and you use it to pump water up a mountain, like at Cruachan hydropower electric station, and then when you do need the energy, like when the wind stops or the sun stops shining, then you let that water run back down, generates more energy. So it's like a giant ecological battery. Did you hear her say that? I don't know. I'll stop talking and let you say something.
I didn't hear her say that, and I'll be perfectly honest. This isn't my area of expertise, but you mentioned Cruachan, and I mean, it seems to me that was way ahead of its time. An entirely sensible way of doing things, all those years ago. But yeah, I mean, I just think that the possibilities they're limitless, in how we can do this. We've just been, held back from doing them. We've been very slow, and certainly with no encouragement from the UK, who insist on, still pumping in money to oil and gas fields. So we've got a real amount of catch up to do. But I think it's really encouraging, how much potential we have here in Scotland and how much we are actually using it. And, Kenny pointed out that this crazy situation of us having to pay for excess, etc. It just shouldn't be like that. I mean, no one would think that was a good, a good system at all for any nation to be in. So, the sooner we can start, forging our own way with this, the better.
Thank you, Rona. And actually, just out of interest, Philippa Whitford's point was that it's not a new technology, as you say. It's been there in Cruachan for a good number of years, and yet Tory ministers were talking about it as a nascent technology that they would support. And Philippa Whitford's point was that there are 6 sites in Scotland that have been identified as shovel-ready. But the thing is, to build up a hydroelectric power station up a mountain, you can't do that quickly. We have to start now. But just before we leave this item, Kenny, I was wondering, the report also mentioned something that isn't always highlighted, which is that renewables, if countries adopt them properly, then there's going to be health benefits, there's going to be cleaner air. And also, but do you agree that renewables really is the next industrial revolution? And so any country that doesn't go full steam ahead is going to end up being left behind?
Yeah, and I think there's a danger that we're being left behind already. Just on construction, I mean, I was in construction for 40 years. Um, Vast amounts of money are invested in nuclear energy, which is one of the most expensive and polluting energy forms that there is. Um, Not just from the point of view of getting rid of the waste, but the amount of concrete that you require to build a nuclear power station. I mean, a lot of the hydro shovel-ready project that Philippa was talking about in Parliament in Westminster, it's mainly boring through rock to create tunnelways in rock. There's one at Loch Ness that's SSE developed a few years ago, and obviously Cruachan is a perfect example as well. And there's smaller scale ones operating. I'm not a supporter of the royal family by any means, but they've themselves have put in a hydro scheme um, in Glenmick, just down from Loch Mick, and there's various small ones. There's a small one in Aberdeen. Very, very clean. You hardly notice them once they're complete. Not large amounts of concrete. It's a steel turbine. And we have got the ability and the technologies and the industries to actually produce the goods for these developments. So we shouldn't be importing stuff. We should be developing the technology here. And if we need to bring in experts from other parts of the world, it goes back to the immigration policy. We need to bring in people who are experts in this. And you know, our fleet of ferries that is talked about a lot, we should be moving towards hydrogen for them, no question.
Thank you, Kenny. So I'll move on to the next item. So Rishi Sunak has decided that Suella Braverman did nothing wrong, and that there were merely allegations about Boris Johnson emerging. Sorry, I'm misreading that wrong, but Tory MPs are alleged to have claimed driving fines on expenses and dark money keeps rolling in. So basically this item is about Tory sleaze. What can I say? Let me find something in my notes that's of some interest. Let's start with Suella Braverman. She failed to declare previous work that she had done for the Rwanda government, and then she admitted that eventually that she had received points on her driver's license. Forgive me, I don't drive, so I don't know much about these sort of things. And then tried to get the civil service to get her off the hook so that she could have private driving courses and speed awareness courses. And her advisors, when asked directly by journalists, denied that she had any points on her licence and denied that at all. But it turns out that they were lying to journalists. So I think maybe I should get back to our guests so that they can save this item and save my blushes. Rona, I'll come to you first. So you're in Holyrood and you're watching things unfold in Westminster in terms of the Tory Conservative government. What are your thoughts about the catalogue of recent events?
Yeah, and it is an absolute catalogue of events, but it's been going back for years. And I think the really depressing and telling thing is that now we're almost not surprised when we hear of something else and then something else. It's just, it just seems to be one thing after another, and we've almost come to expect it of the Tories now. But I think it really does call into question the hypocrisy of the Scottish Tories in Holyrood, who continually want to inquire about the internal finances of our party, of the SNP, of making out that we're not transparent, etc., etc. When the Tories have been like this for almost as long as I can remember, but it does seem to be now it's just one thing after another, and it's to see Rishi Sunak saying nothing to declare here, nothing to see here, move on. People just don't believe it. They just don't believe that that should be allowed to happen. And yeah, I mean, it's just they're absolutely mired in sleaze and misdemeanors, and that's been going back for years and years.
Thank you,
And
Rona.
sorry, just can I just add too that Boris Johnson's actions during the COVID pandemic, which we now all know about, were absolutely shameless. They were disgraceful, and he still lies about it. But we know that while other people made the biggest sacrifices in their lives, he was carrying on as normal because the rules didn't apply to him. And I think, I think anybody who can forget that and vote Conservative after knowing that that's what happened really needs to have a word with themselves.
Thank you, Rona. Kenny, just before we wind up on Braverman and go on to Boris Johnson and his the new revelations about his COVID parties, when it comes to Braverman, it's not about the speeding offence, is it? I mean, she's the Home Secretary. She's responsible for the laws and the rules that we are governed by and we're expected to abide by. It's about equality before the law. I don't know. Is she following the same rules as us? Is it one rule for all, including the Home Secretary?
Well, she's got form previously because she was sacked from government not that long ago and then reinstated by the current Prime Minister. And rules are made, and rules should apply to everyone without fear or favour. And it's politicians have got to abide by the rules, and they shouldn't be claiming any preferential treatment, and they shouldn't be reclaiming cost of fines. No employer would allow an employee who broke the law to claim that through expenses. That's obscene. The lying within the Conservative Party, and there's a danger that it infects larger parts of politics because people get away with it. And I saw a piece that Emily Maitlis did on her podcast this week when she was interviewing a Tory advisor. And he said, well, there's lies and there's lies. And she gave an example of there's lying and there's lying. And I mean, it's unfortunately, as I said, when it spreads across politics, I believe the allegation includes an SNP MP, Dave Dugan, has possibly reclaimed a parking or speeding fine through expenses. I don't know the details. It's an allegation that's on the BBC website. So that's got to be looked at and dealt with promptly by the SNP as well. And, I'm sorry, I believe the SNP and the independence parties have got to be whiter than white. Just because Tories are doing things that are far worse doesn't mean we should do small things. In Emily Maitlis's piece, she was talking about having asked Donald Trump a question, and he was boasting that he had the largest ballroom in Manhattan. And she knew it was a lie, but she didn't pick him up on it. And he lies, and Boris Johnson lies and lies and lies. Now, small lies are small lies, but then the biggest lie that Donald Trump recently committed was saying that the election result was fraud in the United States, which caused a riot at the Capitol building. People died. Lots of more people could have died, and it undermines everything. So the lying, the rule breaking, the one rule for them, the wrong rule for us, it's got to stop, and it's got to be stamped on. And wherever it is, however minor or however great, Boris Johnson really, really needs to be dealt with properly. And if an MP took a train from London to Glasgow and is rightly punished through the courts and Westminster, then the same has to apply. The Metropolitan Police have been falling down badly. Talk about institutional corruption within a police force. The Metropolitan Police behaviour, dealing with politicians and dealing with other matters, is just appalling.
Thank you, Kenny. I watched that podcast as well. I say watched because they video it as well, and it was spectacular. Emily Maitlis's, because you're right. Guto Harry said, so there's different levels. Some lies are bigger than others, and Maitlis said, no, there are consistent patterns of behaviour. It was destructive. He continually misled this country, and if I would urge you to seek it out, because Guto Harry's face is an absolute picture there, but getting called up. But we don't have much time, but I'd really like to risk going late even to discuss Margaret Ferrier and the fact that she is possibly going to have a vote against her. She's escaped by the skin of her teeth because the vote wasn't carried out last week as it was scheduled to. But word on the street is that in Westminster, Conservative Tory MPs are going to support, or they're going to back Margaret Ferrier and vote for her, that she should not be suspended. And it seems that either, I don't know, what do you think? I've got two or three options here. One is that the Tory MPs that are going to back Margaret Ferrier, maybe they're just COVID deniers and they think that you should be able to travel up and down the country even if you're infectious on public transport regardless. Or there's another more kind of covert theory, which is that if Margaret Ferrier gets off with Tory support, then Tory MPs can use the same argument to get Boris Johnson off the hook when it comes to what the outcome for his newly revealed Chequers COVID parties. Rona, you first as you're a politician. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I genuinely don't know. I mean, all of the above, all of the scenarios that you posed there may well be true. I mean, I genuinely don't know about that. I just think it's a very sorry situation that we're in, and I mean, no politician has a right, to have be in a seat, and I just think if you put yourself above, your party's aims, etc., then you've really lost your way, and I think it's clear that it's going to culminate in an election sooner or later, and I think this is just unnecessary, and we won't know about the speculation. Maybe more will come out over the next few weeks, though I believe Westminster's in recess this week, but maybe more will come out about why all that happened. I genuinely don't know. I mean, we were expecting the announcement on Thursday. It didn't happen. And for what reason, I just don't know. But I think, it's only a matter of time. And, you just can't put yourself up as clinging on to a seat where clearly there is no appetite for you to be there. So, yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Rona. Kenny, I'd really like to come to hear what you think on that, but we're behind time. Is it okay if we move on to the next item?
Yeah, no problem. All I would say very, very quickly is I think justice needs to be consistent. So if the justice is served out to Margaret Ferrier, then it should be served out to all politicians who've broken the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item. When Scotland voted for devolved government in 1997, the Conservatives opposed it. So has Brexit given them the means to limit the powers of the Scottish Parliament and return control to Westminster? So when I was reading this item, I was kind of reminded that when the UK voted to leave the European Union, we were told that powers that were currently with Europe would come back to Holyrood, powers devolved or powers retained. That hasn't really happened. Rona, do you remember that period when, just after Brexit, when we were told what to expect in terms of powers that were going to come back to Scotland? What the Smith Commission? What happened?
I remember it all too well. I mean, and I think the short answer to your question is that they think Brexit has given them a means to try to control the Scottish Parliament. The Tories didn't want devolution. That was clear from the outset. And recently they've been doing everything in their power to undermine the devolution settlement and the powers that we have. So I think we are very, very alive to this. Obviously, we are, and we will defend the Scottish Parliament and devolution to the absolute hilt. And we will not. We will do everything we can to. They're now just in the throes of blatant power grabs and saying, we will allow you to do this, but not that, and all the rest of it, because they're using the legislation or the lack of protection that we once had under the EU to do this. But we're very aware of it, and we will fight with every fibre of our being to defend our Scottish Parliament, because in the end it's just an assault against democracy, what they're trying to do at every level, and we have to be really, really on it. We have to be really strict about not letting them and fighting every time they try it. They're doing it constantly with legislation, as you know, trying to overrule. And I think it's just it's an insult to the people of Scotland who have voted, who voted for the Parliament, who voted for devolution, voted for us as a government for many years, And I think, they're very blatant and they're not even clever about it, but we will do everything in our power to fight it.
Thank you, Rona. And for you, Kenny, just as Rona was saying there, it seems that there's been systematic breaches of the devolution in Scotland. There have been breaches of the Sewell Convention. Section 35 has been used. The Internal Markets Act, which is currently being threatened to water down the Scottish Deposit Return Scheme, or DRS, as we'll probably call it. And then something that's been little reported in the mainstream media, the new Westminster anti-strike legislation, which Scotland did have an exemption from, courtesy of the House of Lords, courtesy of Cap Tug Forelock, which and the exemptions that the House of Lords had put in place, or the amendments that the House of Lords put in place that was going to exempt Scotland from these new anti-strike laws, were voted down by the House of Commons. So it seems that that's going to now apply in Scotland, but there's been very little mainstream media coverage of it. Have you been aware of that, or?
I just caught snippets about the anti-strike legislation that would apply. I'm just going back a couple of steps. The Internal Market Bill, or Act, I think is the biggest threat to devolution of the lot, because it seems to be all-encompassing. So anything in theory that you propose to do in Scotland that is just marginally different from elsewhere in the UK can be stopped by that. That, to me, almost kills devolution. The anti-strike legislation not being reported by the mainstream media. A similar thing has happened with the reporting of pay deals for nurses and junior doctors. And I know that junior doctors in Scotland isn't settled, but negotiation is ongoing. Whereas in England and Wales, the disputes are roaring ahead. Rona said Westminster are not even being clever with some of the stuff. I suspect some of the stuff they are being quite clever, and I think we've got to become much cleverer. I've often joked that before you're allowed to be a politician, you should be good at chess, because you ought to be able to predict 3 or 4 moves ahead what your opponent can possibly do as a response to anything that you do. And that skill is very, very important. I think we've got to delve into the detail of all the acts, of the devolution settlement, of the conventions, and the Westminster Acts, and use a lot of clever people who are at our disposal to fight tooth and nail. I get a little bit worried about repetitive language. I was always taught at school that in an essay or anything you're writing, if you use the same phrase again and again, it looks repetitive, it looks poor. So here's a criticism, I'm sorry, but screaming democratic outrage again and again and again just becomes deaf to the ears of the listeners. You've got to rephrase it, you've got to attack it from different directions. But most of all, I think we've got to be cleverer than Westminster. That shouldn't be beyond us by any means.
Thank you, Kenny. I'm happy to accept that criticism. I'm really not the subtlest or the of questioners or hosting this chair, but I do appreciate all your patience with me, viewers at home as well. But let's look a little bit into the deposit return scheme. So it's scheduled to start.
Brian,
Yes.
Brian, sorry, do you mind? Very sorry to interrupt you. I meant to say, it's just for your viewers might be interested, on Tuesday in Parliament, Keith Brown, the Deputy Leader of the SNP, is holding a members' debate on protecting devolution and the powers of the Parliament. So we've got quite a number of speakers speaking in that debate, and people might be, it could be live streamed obviously on the Parliament website. Sorry to cut into you there, I should have said that earlier.
No, not at all. No need to apologise. I've got a note here to say Keith Brown will raise a motion in Holyrood on Tuesday, so I'm really pleased that you've actually, I was going to mention that at the end, and if we had time, maybe
Tuesday night at 5 o'clock. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. And my question, if we did get time to talk about it, was: do you think will Douglas Ross or Anna Sarwar turn up for that debate? But time will tell. Sorry, Kenneth, I'm being all like a bludgeon again. But going back to the DRS, it's scheduled to start in the deposit return scheme. It's scheduled to start in Scotland in March 2024, the next year, while other parts of the UK are due to bring in their schemes the following year in 2025. The schemes for England and Northern Ireland don't include glass, but the Welsh scheme will include glass, and it looks like that is going to be given permission or going to be given the go-ahead by Westminster. And just a little footnote, there's something like an estimated 600 million glass bottles that could be recycled in Scotland. That's not a typo. It's 600 million glass bottles a year that could be recycled in Scotland. Martin Geisler this morning asked Lorna Slater, who was the Minister for the Circular Economy when this was passed, asked her why she hadn't applied for an exemption before passing the DRS bill in Holyrood. And Slater's answer to him was that the bill passed through Holyrood back in 2020, which predates the UK Internal Market Bill. Humza Yousaf commented he got a letter from the Scottish Government at 9:45 p.m. on Friday, which demanded that glass be excluded from the Scottish Deposit Return Scheme. That letter was signed by the Three Graces, Alistair Jack, the Scottish Secretary, Therese Coffey, the UK Environment Secretary and Minister for Intergovernmental Relations, Mr Michael Gove. I don't know, Rona, I'll come to you first. What do you think this letter and the Westminster's involvement in the DRS scheme is going to mean for intergovernmental relations?
Well, I mean, it's clearly very provocative and antagonistic from their side. I mean, the First Minister received the letter after it was announced in the press of what the government were proposing. And I think, again, I mentioned the word blatant. This is just blatant, anti-devolution. And, that Lorna Slater was right. In 2020, the legislation passed with the consent of all parties. The Conservatives' hypocrisy coming to the fore again, because Maurice Golden's now saying, that, including glass is terrible. And in fact, in 2019, he was quoted as saying it's absolute common sense and it should be included. So, that again, that's not surprising coming from the mouths of Tories, but it's just another example of what we were talking about previously of this sort of mission creep onto our powers. And it's just a sort of, you will have to do as we say, and it's our scheme will go ahead, and we're just going to have to see, and I fear that Wales may come up against the same clause that we have if they want to include glass, but this was all done way before the Westminster government could have had a say in it. So yeah, there we are. It's out there for everybody to see.
Thank you, Rona. And Kenny, although the impetus for the deposit return scheme is environmental as part of the Scottish Government's drive to reach net zero, just as we spoke about in the previous item about how this is going to be a burgeoning new economy, it's not just a deposit return scheme, it's a job creation scheme, isn't it?
Yep, and it's admirable. I mean, I notice in Twitterland, some people are sort of trying to claim that there's a curbside bottle collection in many local authority areas. Well, there certainly isn't in our local authority area. And I'd have no problem taking my bottles to be returned. I do take them to recycling, but I've got to drive them at the moment, and I'd have to drive them under the new scheme, although there may be more collection points with the deposit scheme. So yes, it's job creation. And Rona's absolutely spot on. This is blatant provocation. I think it's a deliberate tactic by Alistair Darling and Michael Gove. Alistair Jack and Michael Gove. But it's the opposition parties at Holyrood, as Rona has said, double speak. And I think if we can call them out, if we can get quotes from 2020 and then quotes from 2023 that show Tory double speak and Lib Dem double speak and Labour double speak, it would be very, very powerful. Because they are politicking and they are provoking, and it is blatant, and it's intolerable. And we have to move forward. I don't understand, for example, why there are so many different shapes, sizes, and colours of bottles. You don't want to become a parochial and prescribe against certain things, But I also think, as well as recycling crushed glass, we should be looking at reuse of bottles before they're smashed. I mean, Caribbean countries that sell beer bottles collect the beer bottles back in the crates, and I believe they can use them for up to 20 times. And I believe similar schemes occur in Germany. So as well as the deposit return scheme, I think we should be reusing glass bottles as well. But to exclude glass is just crazy.
Yeah, I think that used to be the case here, but I mean, we're really by the seat of our pants here in terms of time. But unlike yourselves, I have to take my bottles and jars to the bottle bank on public transport, which makes it sound like I've got a carry out from the off license with all the chinking that comes from my bag. But anyway, that's all we've got time for this afternoon. Rona, thank you, and Kenny, thank you, and thank you for your patience with me again. I say that every week, but we'll let you go and get back on with your sunny Sunday afternoons.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for quoting one of my heroes, Ray Davis.
Yeah, mine too.
It could be more of that, couldn't there? People can spot them maybe week by week. Okay, well, all the best. So that's it for this week's Full Scottish. But before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now, we have a pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and ensure that we are able to continue making programmes. Thank you again, Rona. Thank you, Kenny, for joining us. Please join us again on Monday evening when we hope that it's going to be Lewis is in the hot seat here. But in the meantime, goodbye and thank you for watching.